The supper that was meant to bind neighbors together ended in silence, and the hills of the Appalachians have carried that silence for generations. In 1803, when the frontier still pressed against the wilderness and families clung to one another for survival, the McIntyre household became the center of a mystery no one wished to inherit. What began as a gathering of laughter, venison, and cider turned into a question that gnawed at every mind. How could 12 guests simply vanish between one breath and the next? Before we step deeper into this tale of suspicion, honor, and betrayal, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single step through the shadows of the past. Elias McIntyre had risen before the sun that day, as he did most days, with frost still clinging to the edges of the cabin window. At 27, his shoulders bore the weight not just of firewood and plows, but of a family name that mattered more than gold in the settlement. He tied back his dark hair, weathered by wind and labor, and stepped out into the crisp air. The ridges loomed above like watchmen, and the forest carried both promise and threat. Inside, Margaret McIntyre stirred the pot of beans, humming softly, though her voice carried an edge of unease. She was a woman whose strength rarely cracked, but even she knew the supper would not be simple. Guests were expected, neighbors with whom the McIntyres had lived, bartered, and feuded. Food was prepared in abundance, cornbread baked golden in the hearth, venison roasted slow, and cider pulled from the cellar with the chill of the earth still clinging to it. Angus McIntyre, patriarch of the family, sat near the fire, sharpening his hunting knife. His face, lined like the bark of an old oak, revealed little, but his silence was weighty. He had lived long enough to see men turn to wolves when pride was wounded. His only words that morning, directed to Elias, were low and gruff. "Mind yourself. Words cut deeper than steel if you let them." Elias nodded, though unease stirred in him as well. He knew every neighbor by name, knew their stories, knew the grudges that hung between them like storm clouds. Samuel Rains, a trapper quick with a joke but quicker with suspicion. John Carter, whose boundary dispute with Angus had nearly spilled into violence 2 winters ago. The O'Donnells, newcomers with charm but little trust from the old settlers. Each invitation had been extended with Margaret's hope that peace could be mended around a table, that bread might patch what bullets could not. The cabin itself, sturdy logs fitted by Angus's own hands years before, stood as both home and fortress. Its single room for gatherings carried the smell of pine, smoke, and simmering stew. Elias paused at the threshold, listening to the distant call of a crow echoing through the trees, a sound that made the hair at his neck rise. He pushed the thought aside. Tonight all would eat, and perhaps all would reconcile. Yet even as he carried firewood inside, Elias's mind traced the cracks in this fragile peace. He recalled the whispers of neighbors accusing one another of hoarding, of cheating in trade, of trespassing on hunting grounds. He knew supper could be the chance to bury grudges, or ignite them. As the day wore on, the air thickened with the smell of roasting meat and wood smoke curling from the chimney. Children ran about, their laughter weaving against the steady chop of Elias's axe. Margaret's hands moved swiftly, her eyes darting often to the door as though expecting trouble before it arrived. Angus spoke little, but his presence filled the room like the weight of stone. Elias felt the weight of expectation pressing hard against his chest. Tonight, 12 seats would be filled. Tonight, the McIntyre name would either rise with honor or sink under suspicion. The Appalachians held their breath as the sun sank behind the ridges, painting the sky in fire. Supper was coming, and with it the test of every bond the family had ever forged. The McIntyre household stood as both refuge and burden to those within its walls. It was a place where voices clashed as often as they wove together in harmony, and where every soul carried a role that shaped the fate of the family. Angus McIntyre, the patriarch, was a man whose presence demanded silence more than speech. Years of hardship had carved his body into something as unyielding as the ridges surrounding their farm. His broad shoulders carried scars from hunting accidents and from disputes that had turned rougher than words. He was a man respected, but rarely loved outside his family, for his temper was sharp and his memory longer than most dared to test. Yet within the household his authority stood unquestioned. A man's worth, Angus often declared, is measured by the steadiness of his word and the strength of his back. His sons had heard it so many times it echoed even when he said nothing. Margaret, by contrast, was the hearth that never went cold. She carried herself with the grace of someone who knew every crack in the walls, every hunger that needed tending, every tension that might break into fire if left alone. Her voice had a softness that soothed, yet it carried weight that even Angus could not ignore. Her hands, calloused from years of work, bore the quiet strength of a woman who had pulled calves from the mud, buried children too small to name, and still managed to keep the family's spirit alive. She did not shout to be heard. She was the kind of woman whose silence commanded listening. Elias, as eldest son, carried the heavy burden of expectation. He was no stranger to toil, fields, hunts, repairs, negotiations at the trading post, but more than labor, he carried the role of heir to the McIntyre reputation. In him, Angus's pride rested, and in him, Margaret's hopes sought shelter. He knew every look from his father demanded strength, every glance from his mother urged fairness. It was a balance that weighed upon him like a yoke. Beside him were his siblings, each a thread in the complex weave of the household. Duncan, just a year younger, was a man of restless spirit, bold and sometimes reckless. His laughter carried farther than Elias's, but so did his anger. Often he questioned decisions, and though he never defied his father outright, he made clear that he carved his own path in the shadow of the ridges. There was also Mary, their younger sister, whose presence softened even Angus's sharpest moods. She had inherited Margaret's patience and had learned quickly how to stitch not just torn clothes, but torn tempers. Her voice was gentle, yet she possessed a quiet courage that belied her age. "We must be the ones who mend," she once whispered to Elias, "or else nothing holds." Beyond them were the cousins who had come to live with the family after hardship struck their parents. Each carried their own scars and ambitions, their presence a reminder that family in the frontier meant more than blood, it meant survival. The supper that Margaret planned was not merely a meal, it was a chance to stitch together the fabric of a settlement, fraying under disputes and suspicion. "If bread cannot heal us," Margaret told Elias as she pressed dough into shape, "then nothing will." Elias listened, though his doubts gnawed at him. He knew bread could be broken, but grudges were far harder. Angus, overhearing, grunted his reply, "Peace is only as strong as the man who holds it. A weak hand loses grip." Elias felt caught between them, his mother's hope, his father's caution. As twilight neared, the cabin filled with the low murmur of preparation, each family member moving with purpose. Elias carried the weight not of firewood this time, but of expectation that tonight's gathering would define more than just their reputation. The supper promised unity, yet beneath it lay the risk of division sharp enough to cut deeper than any knife. The McIntyre cabin filled with the fragrance of roasted venison and fresh cornbread as the first knock rattled the wooden door. Elias straightened instinctively, his heart tightening as Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the sound. "They're here," she whispered, her tone carrying both relief and apprehension. The first arrival was Samuel Rains, a wiry man with sharp eyes that missed little. His rifle rested against his shoulder, though his grin was easy. "Evening, Margaret." "Angus." His gaze shifted to Elias, narrowing slightly. "Big night for the McIntyres, gathering us all under one roof." His words bore a friendly lilt, yet Elias caught the weight beneath them. Samuel had always been quick to joke, but quicker still to spread suspicion when it suited him. Behind him came the Carter family. John Carter, heavy-set and broad, carried with him the memory of a long-standing land quarrel with Angus. His wife, Anne, held her shawl close, her expression a blend of politeness and unease. Their eldest son, Thomas, gave Elias a firm handshake, but avoided Angus's eyes. John's voice was steady but lacked warmth. "Hope the meal holds, Margaret." "A good supper makes better neighbours." Next entered the O'Donnells, Irish newcomers with lilting accents that still struck some settlers as foreign. Patrick O'Donnell carried a charm that seemed to stretch as far as his ambitions. His wife, Bridget, smiled graciously, though the weariness in her eyes suggested the struggle of carving a life in a land that had not welcomed them kindly. Their children clung to her skirts, quiet but observant. Patrick clasped Elias's hand firmly. A table shared is a quarrel buried, aye. Tonight we'll see if that holds true. The room thickened with warmth as more guests arrived, neighbors from ridge and hollow, farmers with hands calloused like Elias's, hunters with faces hardened by wind. Some greeted the family with genuine affection, others with stiff courtesy. Each carried unspoken histories, grudges, or hopes into the cabin, their presence a tapestry of the settlement's tangled bonds. Margaret moved among them, her voice soft but commanding, guiding them to places at the long wooden table Angus had built himself. Her smile bridged tensions, her hand on a shoulder calming disputes before they could spark. Elias watched her carefully, admiring the way she kept peace not with force, but with patience. Angus remained near the hearth, his posture tall, his eyes sharp as flint. Few dared meet his gaze for long. When John Carter offered a brief nod, Angus returned it without warmth. Silence followed, heavy enough that Elias stepped in. "We're grateful you all came," he said, his voice even but firm. "Neighbors share more than land. We share the burden of this place, and tonight the table reminds us of it." The words eased some of the tension. Samuel chuckled, raising his tin cup. "Spoken like a man ready to lead." Elias forced a thin smile, but felt his father's stern eyes on him, measuring. As dishes were set upon the table, beans thick with seasoning, bread steaming, venison glistening, conversation began to stir. Yet beneath polite talk of harvests, trapping roots and weather, sharper threads ran. Samuel muttered about unfair trades at the post. Patrick spoke of new land he hoped to claim, which made John Carter bristle. Laughter flickered, but so did suspicion, exchanged in glances as quick as the crackle of the fire. Elias caught Mary's eyes across the table. She sat quietly, listening more than speaking, her gaze moving from one guest to another. When he raised a questioning brow, she shook her head faintly, as if warning him that trouble already brewed. The meal had begun, and with it, the delicate dance of pride, hunger, and buried resentment. Each guest carried a story, each story carried a wound, and all of them now rested under the roof of the McIntyre family. Elias sensed it deep in his chest. This was no ordinary supper. It was a reckoning waiting to unfold. The table groaned beneath the weight of food, steam rising from platters as hands reached hesitantly. For a brief moment, warmth filled the cabin. Cider sloshed into tin cups, bread was passed from hand to hand, and the firelight painted each face with a golden glow. Yet even as the meal began, Elias felt unease curling in the air like smoke that seeped into lungs without notice. "Fine venison, Angus," John Carter said, tearing meat with his knife. His tone carried courtesy, but the stiffness in his jaw betrayed it. Angus gave a curt nod, neither smiling nor offering thanks. Margaret quickly interjected, "Elias took it down himself just last week." "The boy's aim is steady as his father's." Samuel Rains chuckled, his eyes glinting. "Steadier, perhaps. I've seen Angus miss once or twice." His laughter filled the table, though not everyone joined in. Elias's chest tightened, unsure if it was jest or a blade hidden in words. Conversation shifted from game to harvests, but each topic cracked under the weight of grudges. Patrick O'Donnell praised the richness of his small plot, which drew a muttered remark from another guest about newcomers claiming too much land. Ann Carter spoke kindly of Margaret's bread, but her husband's eyes lingered on Angus as though the compliment were a warning. Elias tried to smooth the edges. "Food tastes better shared," he said, lifting his cup. "May it remind us we're bound stronger together than apart." His voice carried, but the silence that followed was heavier than the toast deserved. Mary, seated between the younger O'Donnell children, lowered her gaze, whispering softly to them about the sweetness of the cornbread. Her calmness was a thread keeping the table from unraveling. Yet she too glanced at Elias with worry, as though sensing the air thickening. Margaret moved gracefully, refilling cups, smoothing over interruptions with small remarks. Still, her hands trembled slightly when she set down the jug of cider. Elias noticed, and unease gnawed sharper. His mother, whose composure rarely cracked, seemed to brace against something unseen. Outside the wind shifted, pressing against the cabin walls with a hollow moan. The fire snapped loud, startling one of the Carter boys, who dropped his fork. Laughter followed, quick and brittle, as though everyone sought to dismiss the sound. Patrick O'Donnell leaned forward, his voice carrying more than he perhaps intended. Strange, is it not? We sit here, eating as though nothing divides us, yet we all know the hills remember grudges better than men do. His wife touched his sleeve, murmuring his name, but his eyes swept the table. I'd wager every man here carries some weight against another. A silence followed that Margaret tried to soften with a gentle, Patrick, tonight is for peace. But the words barely settled before Samuel added, Peace doesn't come from bread, Miss Margaret. It comes when men settle what festers. The fire popped again, sending sparks upward. Elias clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to answer sharply. He knew if he snapped, the fragile cord holding the gathering together would break. Instead, he forced calm. We came here to share a meal. Let's keep to that. Yet, as he spoke, he realized voices had grown quieter, movements slower. Guests shifted in their seats, their glances sharp, their laughter thin. It was not open quarrel, but something subtler, a tension that hummed beneath every word, every bite. Margaret laid a hand briefly on Elias's arm, her eyes filled with unspoken warning. He understood then that the supper had turned, not by accident, but by the weight of every wound the settlement carried. Though the plates were full, the air itself tasted bitter. Elias swallowed hard. The night had only begun, but already he knew the table would not hold peace much longer. The fire burned steady, throwing shadows across the faces gathered, but the air inside the cabin had grown tight, like a bowstring drawn too far. Elias lifted his cup once more, searching for words that might loosen the tension. To neighbors, he said firmly, forcing his voice to rise above the uneasy murmur. Hand to the work that binds us. May we walk the same path no matter how rough the stones beneath our boots. Cups lifted reluctantly, the toast carried more by habit than conviction. Tin clinked, cider swirled, and for a fleeting moment there was stillness. Then came a sound, a gust against the chimney, a hollow rush that seemed to slip down into the room. The fire flared, then sputtered, sending sparks into the air. Darkness pressed in, broken only by the flicker of flame. Mary gasped softly, clutching the edge of the table. Margaret steadied her, her own lips moving in a prayer barely whispered. Angus's eyes narrowed, sharp and unyielding. It's nothing but draught, he muttered, though his hand tightened on the knife at his belt. When the fire steadied again, Elias looked around, his breath caught in his throat. The seats that moments before had been filled now stood empty. Plates half finished, cups tipped, spoons left mid-bite, 12 chairs without their owners. Silence crushed the room. For an instant, Elias believed he had blinked too long, that his mind had played a cruel trick. He rose quickly, his chair scraping the floor. Where did they go? His voice cracked louder than intended. Duncan sprang up beside him, eyes wide. They were right here. He broke off, staring at the abandoned plates. Margaret whispered, Holy Lord, her hands trembling as she clutched the table's edge. Mary pressed against her side, her face pale. Angus moved to the door with heavy steps, flung it open and peered into the night. Wind rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and earth, but nothing else. Not a soul outside, he growled, though his voice carried something rare, doubt. Elias rushed toward the back of the cabin, throwing open the shutters, scanning the yard. The ground lay quiet under the pale wash of moonlight, no footprints fresh, no figures retreating into the woods. It was as though the 12 had been plucked from their chairs and carried into the air. They wouldn't leave without word, Elias said, his chest tightening. He touched one of the cups left behind, still warm, cider half drunk. His hand shook. Duncan swore under his breath. This ain't right. No man vanishes without sound. Margaret's voice broke, fragile yet firm. We must not give in to fear. Search the cabin, every corner. They searched, overturning benches, opening trunks, even lifting the heavy boards near the hearth. Nothing. No footprints on the floor beyond what had already been there. No sign of struggle. only absence, heavier than any body could weigh. Angus's jaw worked as he stood rigid near the doorway. "Someone's playing us for fools." "Who would dare such a thing?" Elias demanded. His voice shook, not with anger alone, but with the deep unease spreading through his chest. No answer came. The only sound was the pop of the fire and the restless wind against the logs. Mary whispered a prayer under her breath, words trembling as though afraid to touch the air. Elias stood still, staring at the table that only moments ago had been filled with neighbors, laughter strained but present. Now it stood like a graveyard, food untouched, silence echoing. The supper that was meant to bind had instead torn something open. And deep inside, Elias knew this was only the beginning. The cabin felt smaller now, its walls pressing inward as if to squeeze the truth from those still standing. The McIntyres huddled in disbelief, their breaths shallow, eyes darting from the empty chairs to one another. The fire snapped and hissed, its warmth doing little to chase away the chill that crept into their bones. "They couldn't have just walked out," Elias muttered, his voice tight. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room as though movement itself might stir some explanation from the silence. "They didn't walk," Duncan shot back, his tone sharp. "No man leaves without a sound, not 12 at once." His eyes flicked toward the door, suspicion written across his face. "Unless they were taken." Mary pressed close to Margaret, her hands twisting at her skirt. "Taken by who? Or what?" Her voice faltered, the last word trembling as though she feared it might summon something unseen. Angus cut her off. "No talk of foolishness." His tone carried command, but his eyes betrayed unease. "Men are behind this. Men with reason." The weight of that truth pressed heavier than any superstition. If men were behind it, then enemies lived closer than the family dared admit. Before the McIntyres could collect themselves, the sound of hurried voices rose outside. Footsteps crunched on the frosted ground, and a hard knock rattled the door. Angus threw it open, revealing neighbors drawn by whispers carried faster than smoke. Thomas Carter's face was pale, his breath visible in the night air. "Where are they?" he demanded. "My father, my mother. Where'd you hide 'em?" Elias stepped forward, hands raised. "They were here not moments ago, eating with us, then gone. We don't know how." "You expect us to swallow that?" Thomas's voice cracked with fury. Behind him others gathered, families of the missing, men with lanterns and suspicion burning hotter than their flames. Samuel Raines's brother Jacob spat into the dirt. "Every quarrel in these hills traces back to your kin. How 12 vanish in your cabin, and you say it's mystery?" His words dripped with accusation. Margaret spoke firmly, her voice cutting through the clamor. "We broke bread together, as neighbors should. We meant no harm." But her calmness only stirred more anger. A woman cried out from the crowd, clutching a shawl to her chest. "My husband sat at your table." "Where is he now?" the mob murmured, voices rising with fear that twisted into blame. Duncan bristled, his fists clenched. "You think we made him disappear? That we've got 12 people hidden under the floorboards?" "Reckon you might," Jacob growled, stepping forward. "Or reckon you poisoned him? Angus never did let go of grudges easy." Angus's eyes hardened, but he did not lash out. His silence was heavy, and it fed the whispers around him. Elias felt panic clawing at his chest. He saw how quickly fear turned neighbor against neighbor, how suspicion spread like fire through dry grass. "We'll search," Elias declared suddenly, his voice loud enough to silence the crowd. "Every inch of this place, every yard around it. We've nothing to hide. If you believe us guilty, then you'll see with your own eyes that we hold no secret." The challenge hung in the air. Some nodded grudgingly, others muttered still, but the mob's anger paused. Margaret placed a hand on Elias's arm, her eyes heavy with both gratitude and fear. Thomas Carter spoke again, his voice low, trembling with grief. "If I don't find my kin, Elias, I'll not forget whose table they vanished from." The neighbors pressed forward, lanterns raised, suspicion burning hotter than their light. The McIntyre household stood under judgment now, and Elias knew no truth would be easy to prove. The night had only deepened, and with it the divide between trust and blame. Lantern light cut through the darkness, swinging shadows long and sharp across the yard. The crowd, restless and grim, scattered under Elias's command. He tried to keep his voice steady, though his heart thudded like a drum in his chest. "Form pairs," he ordered. "Check the woods, the stream, the barn. If they left of their own accord, we'll find their tracks," Duncan muttered low, "and if they didn't leave willing." His words lingered, but Elias pushed them aside. The question already weighed too heavy. Thomas Carter and Jacob Rains shoved past Elias toward the barn, their lanterns bobbing. Others fanned out into the fields. Angus strode behind them, his presence stilling tempers for now, though Elias sensed it was only a thin thread holding the group together. Margaret remained near the cabin, clutching Mary close. She whispered, "Bring them back, Elias. Whatever it takes." Her eyes glistened, but her voice was iron. Elias nodded once before turning to the dark ridge beyond. The forest loomed, a tangle of bare branches scratching against the pale sky. Elias led a small group toward the creek, their boots crunching frozen leaves. Breath clouded the air as silence stretched, broken only by the crack of twigs underfoot. Jacob called from behind, "No prints." "Ground's too hard, or else they never walked this way." His voice carried accusation, as if absence itself proved guilt. Elias knelt near the bank, lantern casting light over mud slick with frost. He searched for broken reeds, any sign of passage, but the creek flowed undisturbed. "Keep looking," he said, though doubt gnawed at him. 12 people could not vanish without a trace, yet no sign marked their going. Further up the ridge, Thomas Carter's voice echoed. "Nothing here. If they were dragged, there'd be marks." His frustration struck like a lash. "You're wasting our time, McIntyre." Elias straightened, squaring his shoulders. "Would you rather sit idle while your kin are missing? We'll cover every path." "Every hollow." His words rang with conviction he barely felt, but they carried enough weight to quiet Thomas for the moment. Hours passed under the cold watch of the moon. The searchers combed fields, barns, woodpiles, even the abandoned mill downstream. They found tools, tracks of deer, the claw marks of a bear along a pine, but no trace of the 12. Each discovery of nothing tightened the coil of fear. Back at the cabin, voices clashed. A woman wailed for her husband. Another cursed the McIntyres under her breath. Duncan slammed his fist against the table, rattling empty plates. "This makes no sense! People don't just disappear!" Angus spoke at last, his tone hard enough to silence the room. "Sense or not, they're gone. We'll search till dawn." His eyes landed on Elias, steady but unyielding. "You'll lead." Elias swallowed, the weight pressing heavier. "I will," he answered, though his chest felt hollow. When the neighbors regrouped, weary and empty-handed, Jacob spat into the dirt once more. No sign anywhere. "Which leaves only one truth. Whatever happened, it happened here." Murmurs rose again, sharper, more dangerous. Elias stepped forward, lantern held high, his jaw clenched. "We'll not stop till we know what became of them. If you think us guilty, then watch us, work beside us. You'll see we've nothing to hide." The crowd shifted uneasily, torn between suspicion and the faint hope of resolution. Fear still ruled their faces, but Elias had given them something else, a path, however narrow. The night stretched long, and though no answers came, the search had only begun. Elias felt the mountains watching, silent and vast, as if the ridges themselves held the secret of the missing. By dawn, the ridge was painted in pale grey, the light thin and bitter against weary faces. The search had yielded nothing, and the neighbors returned to the McIntyre cabin with shoulders heavy, eyes narrowed. What had begun as panic now fermented into accusation, and in the cracks of silence, old wounds stirred to life. Thomas Carter broke it first. 12 people don't vanish without reason. If not by your hand, then whose? We've hunted these woods our whole lives. No beast took them. His voice was raw, a mixture of grief and rage. Duncan bristled, stepping forward. You've long wanted a reason to spit on our name. Maybe it suits you to say we did it, Carter, so your claim on the boundary line looks cleaner. A murmur rose. Several neighbors exchanged glances, not surprised by the jab. Land disputes between the Carters and the McIntyres had simmered for years. Thomas's face reddened, his fists clenched. "You'd best hold your tongue." Margaret's voice cut sharp through the tension. "This is not the time. Quarrels won't bring our neighbors back." But even her calm authority trembled against the weight of suspicion filling the room. Samuel Raines's brother Jacob leaned against the wall, his words slow and biting. "Seems to me Angus's kin profit most if those 12 are gone. Half the men at that table stood against your father in one matter or another. Debt, land, trade. It all points back here." Elias felt the eyes turn to him. He forced himself to stand tall. "And what do we gain if they vanish? Their kin ready to tear us apart, their homes empty of trust? We gain nothing but trouble." Still, doubt lingered. Bridget O'Donnell, her face pale from sleepless night, spoke softly, but with weight. "My Patrick often told me men will hide truth when it suits them. What if some among us chose to disappear, to start anew elsewhere?" Her words drew silence, heavy with new meaning. If the missing had gone willingly, why vanish without farewell? Why leave food and drink mid-bite? From the back, an older settler muttered, "Maybe debt's caught up, or shame. A man will do strange things when cornered." Theories spread like wildfire. Some whispered of secret feuds, others of betrayals in trade or stolen livestock. Old grudges surfaced, each voice pointing not to shadows but to neighbors themselves. What had been hidden in whispers now spilled freely. Elias listened, his chest tightening. He realized the vanishing had cracked open every fault line of the settlement. Trust was thin as bark, and beneath it lay rot. Jealousies, betrayals, lies kept too long. At last Angus spoke, his voice like gravel dragged across stone. "Enough. You speak as though vengeance makes men vanish. Talk all you like, but no words bring them back. Keep your eyes on the truth, not on your grudges." But his attempt at control faltered. John Carter's widow, Anne, stepped forward, her face lined with grief and suspicion. "If the truth lies here, Angus, no sermon of yours will bury it." Her words stung deeper than shouts, and Elias felt the weight shift again, pressing harder against his family. He caught Mary's eyes, wide with fear, and Margaret's, steady though weary. When the neighbors finally dispersed, they left not with comfort but with sharpened suspicion. Elias watched them go, their footsteps heavy on the frozen ground, their whispers carried on the cold wind. He knew then the vanishing was more than a mystery. It was a spark, and the fire it would feed had only begun to burn. The house had grown quiet after the neighbors dispersed, but the silence was heavy, thick with words left unsaid. Elias sat at the table, his hands pressed flat against the wood as though he could steady himself against the weight pressing down on his chest. The plates, still smeared with food from the vanished guests, had not been cleared. They stared back at him, mute reminders of the night's horror. Margaret moved quietly, gathering cups, her motions deliberate, her face pale but calm. She paused when she reached Elias, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "You're wearing yourself thin," she murmured. "A man who carries the burden of all cannot carry himself for long." Elias lifted his gaze, eyes clouded. "They all look to me now. Father stands silent, Duncan's temper flares, and the neighbors, they think we're to blame." "What am I meant to do?" Her touch steadied, and she leaned closer, speaking low so only he heard. "You are meant to stand. That is all. Stand when others waver. Stand when fear shakes the ground. Our name rests not in the mouths of those who curse it, but in the way we endure." Her words sank deep, but Elias shook his head, frustration raw. "And what if I fail? What if I can't hold this together?" "They want answers I cannot give." Margaret's eyes softened, though her voice remained firm. "Answers will come in time, but strength comes first. Elias, I have seen storms tear roofs away. I have seen sickness hollow children's faces. I have buried more than one soul I loved. Yet still I rise, because rising is what keeps the rest from falling." Mary, seated near the hearth, looked up at her mother's words. Her small voice joined softly. "She's right, Elias. We need you steady." Her eyes glistened with tears, but her tone carried quiet courage. Angus shifted in his chair, his silence breaking at last. His voice was low, worn by years of hardship. "Your mother speaks truth. I've fought men, beasts, hunger itself, but none of that weighs as heavy as doubt. Cast it off, Elias, or it will break you before your enemies can." For the first time that night, Elias felt the steadiness of both parents at his back, one hard as iron, the other firm as oak. He inhaled deeply, the air sharp with smoke and sorrow, and let it fill him. "Then I'll stand," he said, his voice steadying, "but I'll not stand idle. We'll find what's been done and we'll face it head-on." Duncan, who had paced like a wolf caged too long, stopped in his tracks and nodded. "That's the brother I know. Say the word, and I'll follow." His eyes still burned with anger, but Elias saw loyalty beneath the flame. Margaret smiled faintly, though her hands trembled as she gathered the last of the plates. "Remember, Elias, truth is not always given freely. Sometimes it must be earned, dug from the ground like roots. When you find it, hold fast, for it will not come kindly." Elias met her gaze, the weight of her words etching itself into him. "I will, mother." "I swear it." The fire crackled, the only witness to the vow. Outside, the wind carried the faint howl of a wolf along the ridge, distant yet haunting. Elias listened, and for the first time since the vanishing, he felt not only fear, but resolve. The family had been tested, and though the burden lay heavy, he would not let it break them. The morning broke cold, a thin mist clinging to the valley as if reluctant to let the night go. Elias led Duncan and 2 other men into the woods, their boots crunching over frost. Each step carried weight heavier than the gear on their backs, for every man hoped the wilderness might yield the truth hidden from the cabin. Duncan grumbled under his breath. "We've combed these ridges near blind. If 12 folk walked out, they'd leave something behind." "They did leave something," Elias replied quietly. "We just haven't found it yet." His eyes scanned the forest, the bark of trees dark with dew, the earth broken in patches. He had grown up in these hills, learning to read signs the way others read scripture. Now he prayed the ground itself would speak. After hours of trudging, they reached a hollow sheltered by pines. There the first clue appeared, a patch of ash half buried under leaves. Elias crouched, brushing the earth away until his fingers touched the blackened remnants of a fire. "They camped here," he whispered. The ash was cold, yet fresh enough to crumble soft in his hand. Duncan knelt beside him. "So they left together." "By choice." His brow furrowed, anger flaring. "Why would they vanish mid-meal only to light a fire here?" Elias shook his head. "I don't know. But look." He pointed to a broken branch nearby, its splinters sharp as though snapped in haste. Further on, a piece of cloth clung to the underbrush, a scrap of linen stained with dirt torn from a garment. One of the men, Jacob Rains, narrowed his eyes. "That's my brother's shirt." His voice cracked, caught between relief and fury. He snatched the fabric, clutching it tight. He was here, alive. Elias felt hope stir, faint but fierce. "Then we're on their trail. They didn't disappear into thin air. They moved through these woods." They pressed deeper, following faint impressions where the ground had softened near a stream. Elias pointed to a heel mark in the mud, blurred but distinct. Someone heavy-set. Could be John Carter. Jacob muttered, "If they left free, why no word? Why leave kin worried sick?" The question gnawed at Elias too, though he forced himself forward. He refused to let doubt slow him. Instead, he searched for more. At the edge of the stream, he found another sign, an overturned tin cup dented on one side. He lifted it, brushing mud away. "This belonged to the O'Donnells. I saw their boy drink from it last night." Duncan swore under his breath. So they ran. But from what? Or toward what? His voice sharpened, his suspicion raw. "And why choose the McIntyre table to vanish from?" "That stains on us, Elias." Elias stood, gripping the cup tightly. "We'll know when we catch up to them. Whatever the reason, it lies in these hills, not in superstition." The search stretched through the afternoon, leading them to a narrow valley where cliffs rose steep and unforgiving. There, among the rocks, Elias spotted markings, bootprints leading upward, scattered as though the group climbed in haste. Jacob cursed. "They're driving us into the cliffs." If they're alive, they don't want found. Elias studied the trail, his gut twisting. Every clue confirmed the guests had left of their own will, yet the manner of their leaving told of desperation. He could not shake the thought that they had fled something or someone known to them. As the wind whistled through the valley, Elias clenched the dented cup in his hand. For the first time, he saw the mystery not as disappearance, but as decision. And that truth unsettled him more than the silence of the empty chairs ever had. The settlement gathered in the meeting hall, a crude structure of rough-hewn logs that smelled of smoke and damp earth. Word of the vanished 12 had spread like fire, and the townsfolk arrived restless, eyes sharp with fear. The benches creaked under their weight, as men and women pressed shoulder to shoulder, each demanding truth, each ready to point blame. Elias stood at the front with Angus, Duncan, and Margaret beside him. Though his body trembled beneath the stairs, he forced himself upright. He felt Mary's gaze steady on him from the side, her quiet faith like an anchor. John Carter's widow rose first, her voice brittle but cutting. "My husband came to your table, he never came home." "Tell me, Elias McIntyre, what happened to him?" Elias swallowed, his throat dry. "I tell you plain, we don't know. They sat, they ate, and then they were gone. We searched the woods. We found traces they had camped, traveled together. They left no bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jacob Rains stood, holding the scrap of cloth Elias had found. His eyes burned. "And yet every sign leads back to your cabin. Every whisper speaks your name. Why is it always the McIntyres at the center of trouble?" Duncan stepped forward, fists clenched. "Because we don't bow when you'd have us bend. That's why. And now you'd turn grief to weapon, lay it on us because it suits your anger." The room erupted, voices clashing, curses thrown. Margaret raised her hand, her voice rising above them, strong as steel. "Stop this!" Her command cut the noise, her presence alone demanding silence. "This trial is not to feed grudges, it is to seek truth. Let my son speak." All eyes returned to Elias. He drew breath, his words steady but heavy. "We gain nothing from their vanishing, do you not see? We suffer with you. Every suspicion laid on us burns our name, weakens our standing. If you think us guilty, then say it plain, but look at what we found." He placed the dented tin cup on the table for all to see, alongside the cloth and the ash gathered from the fire pit. The objects were simple, yet they spoke loudly. They left together, not stolen, not slain, but gone of their own steps. Whatever reason they had, it lies not in murder, but in choice. Patrick O'Donnell's wife, Bridget, stood slowly, her face pale. "Then why not tell us? Why leave in silence? My children cry each night, asking where their father has gone." Her voice cracked, drawing tears from others. Elias's chest ached at her words. "I cannot answer what I do not know. But I swear before you all, I will not rest until I find what drove them. If it is shame, fear, or betrayal, I will uncover it. And I will bring the truth to this hall." The crowd stirred again, torn between suspicion and the pull of his vow. Angus finally spoke, his deep voice filling the chamber. "Judge us if you will, but do not mistake silence for guilt. We will search until the ridges give up their secret." A murmur of reluctant agreement followed, though suspicion still lingered. Some nodded, others turned away, but none could deny the conviction in Elias's words. When the gathering broke, Elias stood drained. But he knew he had held the line. The settlement had not cleared his family, but neither had it condemned them. The trial had not ended the storm. It had only set its course. The hills loomed darker than usual as Elias and Duncan climbed the rocky path, lanterns swaying, their breath clouding in the chill. They weren't alone. Jacob Rains and Thomas Carter followed, their steps heavy, suspicion still sharp in their eyes. The settlement's trial had ended without verdict, but these men sought answers with fists as much as with reason. At the crest of the ridge, Elias halted, scanning the valley below. The wind carried the scent of smoke, faint yet clear. His heart quickened. "There," he said, pointing to the wisp curling above the trees. "Someone's camped not far." Duncan gripped the hilt of his knife. "If it's them, why hide? Why not come back? Because they don't mean to be found, Elias answered, or because someone else keeps them. The descent was steep, branches snapping underfoot, until they reached a clearing where a fire's embers glowed low. No 12 souls waited, only 3 men, neighbors known for their bitterness. Caleb Ward, a trapper with debts deep as the valley, and his brothers, men who often quarreled with the settlement over trade. They looked up, startled, when the McIntyres and their companions broke into the clearing. Caleb sneered, though his hand hovered near his musket. Well, look what the hills dragged in. Come to spy or to plant more blame? Jacob Rains stepped forward, fury etched on his face. Where's my brother? He vanished from McIntyre's table, and here you sit with fire and secrets. Caleb's laugh was hollow. If your brother's gone, reckon it's his own doing. Maybe he tired of sitting at tables where men gnaw grudges like bones. Thomas Carter bristled, his voice raw. You speak as though you know more than you should. Elias held up a hand, his tone sharp. Answer plain, Caleb. Did you see them pass? Did you lead them from my home? The trapper's eyes narrowed. And if I did, what claim have you to judge? The McIntyres think themselves lords of these hills. Maybe the 12 grew tired of bowing. The words stung like a lash, for beneath them lay a truth Elias feared. Perhaps some neighbors had indeed chosen to flee, weary of strife. Yet his blood burned at Caleb's smugness. If you know their path, speak it. Families grieve while you sit fat on secrets. Caleb rose slowly, his shadow stretching long in the firelight. Careful, Elias. A man who pushes too hard may find himself shoved off the ridge. His brothers shifted behind him, their stances threatening. Duncan stepped forward, fire in his eyes. Try it, and I'll see your teeth in the dirt. His hand tightened on his knife, eager for the fight. Elias placed a steadying hand on his brother's arm. No. Violence feeds nothing but the hunger already tearing us apart. He fixed Caleb with a hard stare. If you know where they've gone, withholding it makes you complicit. And when truth comes to light, and it will, you'll answer not only to me, but to every soul left behind. For a long moment, silence stretched, broken only by the wind rustling through the pines. Caleb's smirk faltered, though he did not confess. He spat into the dirt. Search where you will. The hills keep their secrets better than men ever could. Jacob cursed, stepping back in frustration. Thomas shook his head, muttering, We waste time with liars. Elias did not argue. His eyes lingered on the dying embers, on the footprints scattered around the camp. Something in them hinted at passage, too many for just 3 men. He said nothing aloud, but resolve hardened in his chest. The McIntyres would uncover the truth, with or without Caleb's words. The hills had drawn the first true confrontation, but Elias knew it was not the last. The discovery came not with shouts, but with silence. Days of searching wore heavy on Elias, each night colder, each dawn thinner in hope. Yet in a ravine where the creek cut sharp against stone, he found the sign he had prayed for. A leather satchel wedged between rocks, damp but intact. He pried it free, heart pounding as he opened it. Inside lay folded papers, notes scrawled in familiar hands. Duncan leaned close, his breath sharp. "What is it?" Elias read the words by the dim glow of lantern light. They were fragments of farewells, hastily written, addressed not to the settlement, but to loved ones left behind. "We cannot stay. Debts bind us tighter than chains. Better to vanish than be buried by shame." Another note bore Patrick O'Donnell's hand, marked with a smear of dirt. "Forgive me, Bridget. This is our only escape." Elias's grip tightened. They left of their own will. His voice was hollow, disbelief and anger twisting within him. Duncan swore, striking the rock with his fist. "Cowards! They vanished and left us to bear the blame." The weight of it pressed harder than any accusation. Elias saw the truth in every torn scrap. The vanished 12 had not been taken by force, but by choice. They had conspired to disappear, leaving their families and neighbors to wrestle with suspicion. When word spread, the settlement erupted again. Wives wept over notes that gave neither comfort nor clarity. Some raged at the betrayal, Others refused to believe, calling the letters lies planted by enemies. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Handwriting, names, tokens found with the satchel. Jacob Rains stormed into the McIntyre cabin, face pale with fury. He slammed one of the letters onto the table. "You knew!" he shouted. "All along, you knew and let us tear ourselves apart." Elias rose, his voice sharp. "We knew nothing. We searched with you. We bled for this truth as much as any of you." "But why?" Jacob's voice cracked, grief breaking through his rage. "Why would my brother leave his kin? Why would 12 walk out together, abandoning all?" No one could answer. The settlement buzzed with questions, each heavier than the last. Some whispered the 12 had sought land westward, away from debts and disputes. Others claimed they had plotted to start anew, free of old quarrels. Margaret listened to the uproar, her face drawn with sorrow. "Pain drives men to desperate choices," she said softly. "But desperation does not make the wound shallower for those left behind." Her words carried, though they did not soothe. Anger flared in the hall as neighbors turned their grief upon one another. "If they hated this place so," one man spat, "then why not go clean with word and farewell? Why leave us to suspicion and shame?" Elias stood firm, though the storm battered him. "Because fear ruled them," he said. "Fear of debts unpaid, of grudges too deep, of dishonor they could not face. They thought leaving in silence would free them, but it bound us tighter than before. The truth lay bare, but it did not heal. Instead, it split the settlement further, between those who mourned betrayal and those who clung to denial. For the McIntyres it was a bitter vindication, proof they had not slain their neighbors, yet no victory in the knowledge that trust had been broken from within. That night Elias sat long by the fire, the notes spread before him, their ink smeared by his own weary hands. He felt both relief and hollow sorrow, for though the mystery had been unraveled, the wound it left behind was deeper than any he had imagined. The days after the truth broke were harsher than any storm Elias had weathered. The settlement no longer hurled accusations with the same fury, but the wound of betrayal lingered like a raw nerve. Every family touched by the vanishing wrestled with grief and anger, and though the McIntyres were cleared of guilt, suspicion clung to them like smoke that would not lift. Elias bore it in silence, rising before dawn to mend fences, chop wood, and patrol the ridges. Every step he took, he felt eyes on his back. Neighbors who once shared bread now weighed him as if deciding whether to trust or to turn away. Still, he kept on, his resolve carved sharper each day. Margaret watched him from the doorway one morning, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. "You carry it all too heavily," she said gently. "Even storms break when shared." Elias paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "If I falter, who holds the line? Father is weary, Duncan burns too quick, and the settlement waits for us to stumble." She stepped closer, her voice low but unyielding. "Strength is not silence, Elias. It is knowing when to let others bear the weight with you. Even the strongest tree leans on the forest around it." Her words lingered, and though Elias did not reply, he felt something shift inside. That night, by the fire, he spoke to Duncan. His brother looked up, surprised. "You've hardly said 2 words in days. What gnaws at you?" Elias leaned forward, hands clasped. "I can't carry this alone. I need you, not just your fire, but your steadiness. Can you hold that with me?" Duncan's expression softened, rare as dawn on a stormy night. "Aye, brother, I've been too quick to flare, but I'll hold with you. We'll stand side by side, as we always should have." Mary, listening nearby, smiled faintly. "Then the hills won't break us, not while we stand together." Even Angus, who had kept to silence more often than speech, spoke that evening. His voice was gravel, but his eyes carried pride Elias had long sought. "You've done what I could not, held this family firm when the world pushed to tear it apart. I was too hard, too silent, but you—" He paused, as though choosing the words cost him. "You've grown into the kind of man this land needs." The firelight flickered across Margaret's face, her eyes bright with quiet satisfaction. She placed her hand over Angus's and spoke softly. "We endure because we endure together. No other way." In the days that followed, the McIntyres moved as one. When neighbors muttered, Elias met them with calm. When tempers flared, Duncan tempered his fire with reason. Margaret offered bread and counsel to those who came in sorrow, and Mary stitched not just clothes but wounds of trust, her patience weaving threads where others had torn them. Slowly, the tide shifted. Some neighbors still kept their distance, but others returned, drawn by the steadiness of the family that had borne the storm without breaking. Elias saw it in small gestures, a nod from Thomas Carter, once quick with anger, a word of thanks from Bridget O'Donnell, her eyes still rimmed with grief. Trust would not be rebuilt in a day, but the first stones had been laid. Elias stood one evening at the edge of the ridge, the wind tugging at his coat. He gazed over the valley, the cabins scattered like embers below, and felt the weight of his family behind him. For the first time since the vanishing, he believed not only that they would survive, but that they would rise stronger than before. Winter pressed harder as the year turned, the Appalachian ridges draped in snow that glistened beneath the pale sun. The vanished 12 were spoken of less each day, though their absence remained like an echo in every cabin. Some families clung to hope that their kin might return, others cursed their names for the betrayal left behind. Yet through it all, the McIntyres endured, their home standing firm against wind and rumor alike. Elias rose before dawn one morning, the cold biting sharp as he split logs in the yard. The rhythm of axe and wood steadied him, each strike a reminder of the life still to be lived. Duncan joined him soon after, carrying fresh kindling. "Funny," he said with a crooked smile, "how the world near broke us, yet here we stand stronger than before." Elias nodded, sweat steaming from his brow despite the chill, "because we had no choice but to stand, and because we stood together." Inside, Margaret tended the hearth, her voice humming an old tune, her eyes soft as they followed her children moving with renewed purpose. Mary sat sewing by the window, the steady thread binding cloth as she had bound hearts in the household. Angus sat nearby, sharpening his blade with slow, deliberate strokes. For once, his silence was not heavy, it was proud. Neighbors began to visit again, not in crowds of accusation, but in gestures of slow reconciliation. Bridget O'Donnell came one evening with her children, pressing a loaf of bread into Margaret's hands. "I've little left to give," she said, her voice tremulous, "but I thank you for standing firm when I could not." Margaret clasped her hand, replying gently, "We all bend in grief. That is no shame. Strength lies in rising again." Elias saw the moment as a turning point, the first sign that the settlement might mend. Not quickly, not fully, but enough to survive the winter and perhaps the years beyond. Trust, once shattered, would take generations to rebuild, but every stone laid upon that foundation mattered. One night, as firelight painted the cabin walls, Elias spoke aloud the thought he had carried since the first vanishing. "We were tested," he said, his voice steady, "and though we bore the weight of suspicion, we did not break. If we can endure this, we can endure whatever else these hills throw upon us." Duncan grinned faintly. "Then let the mountains try. They'll not find us wanting." Margaret reached across the table, her hand resting over Elias's. "You've grown into more than a son. You've become the root that holds us, even when the storm rages." Angus added quietly, "And in time, the settlement will see it too." The fire cracked, sparks leaping into the air like fleeting stars. Elias gazed into the flames, feeling the weight of his family's faith. Though the vanished 12 had chosen betrayal over truth, their absence had forged something stronger in those who remained. As the night deepened, Elias stepped outside, the cold biting but clean. The valley stretched below, cabins lit like scattered lanterns, each a flicker of survival. The ridges rose around him, silent and vast, keepers of every secret. He felt both small and strong in their shadow, a man marked not by mystery, but by resilience. He drew a long breath, his words carried into the night. "We will endure. Whatever comes, we endure." And as this tale closes, let it remind us, strength is not in avoiding the storm, but in standing together when it breaks. If you found yourself drawn into this story of the McIntyre family and the vanished 12, Make sure to subscribe so more voices of history's forgotten corners reach you. And when this video ends, don't stop here. Click on the one waiting on your screen and continue the journey into another mystery of the American past.